Hello and a very warm welcome indeed to Quadriga. And it's been a tempestuous week in German politics with the refugee crisis once again topping the agenda. Angela Merkel faced an open rebellion led by this man, her Interior Minister, Horst Seehofer. He forced the Chancellor to shift further away than ever before from her open-door refugee policy and accept the creation of proposed screening camps or transit centres for asylum seekers along Germany's southern border. The dispute took Merkel's government to the brink of collapse, and big questions are now being asked about how her coalition can possibly work together in the weeks and months to come. So our question here on Quadriga this week is German stability a thing of the past? And to discuss that question, I'm joined here in the studio by three astute observers of German politics, beginning with Matthew Karnitschnig, Chief European Correspondent at Politico. And Matthew argues that German politics is becoming less boring, not less stable. There's a good name, he says, for the type of confrontation we've seen in Berlin over the past few weeks, and that name is democracy. Also with us is Derek Scally of the Irish Times, who says Germany's stability obsession has done more harm than good to democracy in the Merkel era. More flexibility will bring fresh air, fresh thinking and fresh partners into the political game. Interesting stuff. And a very warm welcome to Nina Haase, the head of DW's Domestic Politics Department. Nina believes the anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany party is the only winner in the current government crisis. It's bad news for Chancellor Merkel and bad news for the EU. OK, Derek, let me begin with you. We've seen this clash of titans here in German politics these last couple of weeks. What's it all been about and where does it leave us?
It's all been about power, it's about positioning, and it's been about impatience. Angela Merkel has been in power for almost 13 years, and there's a backlog of young men who seem to think that they are best placed to replace her. And we have one young man, well, not so young, 53 down in Bavaria, Markus Söder. He has got an election coming up in October, and he thinks unless he gives Angela Merkel a whack, the voters are going to give him a whack in October on the migration question. For 3 years, they've been sort of, the Conservatives down in Bavaria feel they've been kowtowing to Merkel, and now they need to go back, even though the migration crisis really isn't a crisis anymore, but they feel they need to set a sign, so they decided
to... Interesting you say the migration crisis isn't a crisis anymore. Everybody outside Germany would say, yes, it is. It's the big crisis that Germany is facing.
In terms of numbers, if you are worried about 5 or 10 or 20 people coming across and seeking asylum in Bavaria every day, well, then it is a crisis. And around Europe, it is a crisis. But compared to where we were in 2015, in terms of pure numbers, it isn't a crisis. The notion that it just sort of 2 weeks ago suddenly became a crisis again, I think that was an artificial crisis. So what we saw was the CSU, the summer holidays are coming up. This is the last chance to really get people's attention before the autumn and give them the sense that we are tough, we have stood up to Merkel. So I think what we saw was just politics. That there is an unresolved migration crisis is true, and that it's gotten the rest of Europe talking about it perhaps was an unintended positive outcome. The CSU will claim this is what we intended all along. It's not about power, it's about we're worried about Europe. I doubt that very much.
I wonder what Nina has to say about all that, Derek. Unseemly and damaging for the whole political culture, say the critics. Is that, you know, Derek's downplaying it. Some are saying this is a real challenge to Germany's political culture, the way this battle has been fought out.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that, like we said earlier, I'm convinced that the only winner in this unseemly debate, in this public row that was unnecessarily harsh, is the anti-immigrant AfD. And the interesting thing is that they didn't have to do anything. They entered Parliament in last year's federal elections with some 12% or so of support.
Becoming the strongest opposition party in Parliament.
Yeah. Exactly, and a vocal force in Parliament. And of course, you can say that democracy is livelier since they've entered Parliament. Debates are livelier in the Bundestag. But since this row, their support, according to latest polls, has risen to some 16%. Mm-hmm. And this is something where you have to say, will they stop at migration or will they not choose different topics in the future? Now that they've got the Conservatives to essentially take on and adopt their topics, will they stop there or will they go and talk about the euro, talk about housing, which is a big problem in some big German cities?
Just give our viewers a sense of the language that the AfD has been using this past week or so. They've been talking about hunting.
Yes. They said that at the very night they entered Parliament for the first time, we're going to hunt the government.
And hunt Angela Merkel.
And hunt Angela Merkel. And then at the height of this current government crisis, they stood there and said, look, we're hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It sends a shiver down your spine a little bit, yeah?
It does, yeah.
Matthew, the clash between Seehofer and Merkel has been described as a farce, a charade, laughable, self-delusion. What do you make of it all?
Well, I think it was probably inevitable given where the CSU has been on this issue all along. I mean, if you go back to 2015 and remember, this is something that started when Merkel failed to inform Seehofer that she was going to let in these refugees who'd been trapped in Hungary and that were many of them on their way on foot via Austria to Germany. And
did she fail to inform him? It's often said that the Horst Seehofer took the phone off the hook and went to bed early.
Well, whoever knows the details, you would have to assume that the Chancellor of Germany would have ways to get into touch with her coalition partner if she needed to. And, you know, you get the sense that this is very personal, this dispute between the two of them. And I think that's something that came out this week as well with some of the comments that Seehofer made, such as, I'm not going to let, you know, this woman fire me. I made her Chancellor, and this kind of thing, which seems slightly gratuitous because that was said just before they reached this compromise. So you can really feel, I think, also when you see the two of them together that there's no love lost between the two of them. They've been colleagues in various positions for the past 30 years. So I think that at some point this was always going to explode, this dynamic between the two of them, and it happened this week.
OK, let's just listen in for a moment and hear what the two protagonists have been saying. Just get a flavour of what the claims they've been making this past week or so.
With this, the spirit of partnership in the European Union is retained, and a decisive step is taken to organize and guide secondary migration. This is what has been and is important to me.
This clear agreement, which conforms to my beliefs on all 3 points, allows me to continue to carry out the office of Federal Minister of the Interior for Building and Community.
Just picking up on what you were saying, Matthew, this past week, I mean, I've written down how the coalition has been characterised. Feuds, backstabbing, rebellion, infighting, animosity, I could go on. How can they possibly work together in the weeks to come where Germany does face really big challenges?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if Seehofer leaves at some point in the near future. I don't think that the coalition itself will fall apart because they all have too much at stake here and they all fear new elections because they would all suffer if new elections were called. So I do think that the CDU, Merkel's party, and Seehofer's party, the CSU, will continue most likely without Seehofer at some point in the near future. Also because he alienated a lot of people in his own ranks on Sunday by, you know, announcing that he was planning to resign, which really caught a lot of people off guard. I think at the end of this episode, the details of this compromise I don't think are that significant in the long term. It's very complicated. I don't think that, you know, Merkel gave up that much, to be honest. I mean, this story about these transit zones that they're setting up, this is something that she first proposed in 2015. So it's an idea that she herself came up with. At the time, it was not possible because the Social Democrats at the time said, no, they don't want to have these camps on the border. So they found this compromise. It sounds, you know, very, very dramatic to people. But I think at the end of the day, what the Bavarians really wanted in this election campaign that Derek spoke about is to be able to point to their voters to these camps that are going to be set up at the border and say, look, we've established these refugee camps. Never mind that the numbers there are actually quite modest. I think 1,700 people actually applied for asylum on the German-Austrian border last year, which is not a lot.
Mm-hmm. And Nina, Matthew says that Horst Seehofer alienated a lot of people by the way he's been behaving this past week or two. What's your take
in his own party as well?
In his own party as well. There was you know, there was bare fury in his party just a couple of days ago. But also, I think an awful lot of women were alienated from the way Horst Seehofer has been behaving. You know, you mentioned it, Matthew, talking about, you know, effectively, I made her Chancellor, and also saying, throwing his arms up in the air and saying, I can't, apparently saying, he was reported twice to have said, I can't work with this woman. What did you make of all that as a woman?
Or as a citizen, I think, you know, there were lots of people, whether or not they voted for Merkel doesn't really matter, who said you just can't talk to a fellow politician like this. There's just no way of dealing with this problem, and it was just so transparent that this was a power struggle, and this was not like they're trying to sell us now. This was not about the details of a deal that would have solved a problem that we have at the moment. And actually, 69% of Germans share my view that this is something where he should have resigned. You know, because he took it so far, because he let it escalate.
And in view of what Nina's saying, Derek, there's a word in German, it's a fascinating one of these big, long German words, Politikverdrossenheit, disenchantment, disgruntlement, disillusionment with politics. How much do you think that has been stoked in the last couple of weeks? And how much will that feed into growing poll figures, increasing poll figures for the AfD, for the Alternative for Germany?
Oh, I think so. Well, I wouldn't worry too much. I mean, summer is coming, so I think most people are on the beaches. I don't think they're watching the news and so on. So it's pretty much a sort of a wake me up when this is over, and is it over, and did anything change, and so on. But I do think we have been witnessing something in the last few years, and that's what I said in my introductory statement, that sort of it's like water is very slowly unterspülen is the German word. It's like it's washing away some of the foundations, and I don't think the stability we are talking about here, I don't really believe it's as stable. I'm starting to see. I've always said, and I think it was Winston Churchill said in Germany, the trouble with Germans, they're at your ankles or at your throat. And I think what he was trying to say was there's always this pendulum, and this sort of pendulum between self-Zufriedenheit, self-satisfaction and self-loathing. And we saw this week in the German magazine Der Spiegel, there once was a stable country, which is utterly ridiculous. I mean, they're talking about just because they left the football and the cars are, you know, cheating their customers, the car companies, and now this political crisis. And I do wonder that maybe people will over worry about what's actually going on. We're in a period of transition in Germany, just like in the rest of the world. I think Germany has been cushioned from a lot of what's been going on for the last 10 years. I mean, Germany didn't have a real financial crisis.
A period of transition from what to what?
Well, I think this is the big question. Is Germany going to become one of the mainstream countries where you've got this battle between, you know, unilateralism, multilateralism? Is it sort of Germany first? I mean, the Bavarians, that's what I think their long-term game is. They have sort
Bavaria first.
They've locked, well, Bavaria, Germany first, and the leader down there, and some conservatives up here in Berlin are saying this Merkel notion of let's all be friends, hold our hands and come out with a compromise at 3 in the morning is ridiculous. We go in and we bang on the table. There are young men in German politics who believe that now, and I think the long term, what we're seeing here is actually a cultural clash between, does Germany continue to do moderate politics where it tries to get as many people on board and try to humiliate as few people as possible? Or do you go in and throw your weight around and because they see Trump doing it, they see other countries doing it, and they want a bit of the action? And I think that's the battle we're actually seeing now, and that's what worries me slightly more. And that whether people are seeing that now, I worry that people will start reading newspapers that somehow Germany is unstable, Germany is in crisis. It isn't. Just because journalists think that, I don't really agree.
Matthew?
Well, I agree. I don't think that it's in crisis. I think, though, it's worth noting that one of the conclusions one could make from the past couple of weeks is that this little rebellion that we saw from the CSU and from some of the young men, as you call them, in Merkel's party, really failed. And I think there is still a consensus in Germany, a centrist consensus. They don't want to go to the unilateral approach as Trump has done and as the Bavarians appeared to be pushing for. All the polls suggest that the Germans remain committed to the EU. They remain committed to all of these multilateral institutions, the United Nations and so forth. So if this was an attempt to kind of push Germany in a different direction, it really failed. And, I think what this whole, situation has shown to me is that this question of migration, which has dominated the sort of political landscape for the last couple of years, remains unresolved. That's what this was about. And this was sort of a symbol of that. It was a manufactured crisis, yes, but it was possible to manufacture it because Merkel has still not resolved, this question of migration. And I think that this was less about the people who were coming than it is about the people who are already here, you know, the 1 million plus who have come over the past couple of years, and the sort of fears that many Germans have about that. And that's what the AfD taps into. And I slightly disagree with you on the other issues. I don't think that they have any other issues. And if you look at other populist parties around Europe, this is what they have in common with the AfD, is that, you know, they all kind of hew to this question of migration and what can be, you know, how they can use that to kind of instill fear in people. And when they've tried other issues, such as the euro, the AfD actually started as an anti-euro party, did pretty well for a while, and then, you know, fell down into the low single digits. And it wasn't until 2015 with the refugee crisis that they shot back up, and that's where they've been ever since. So I think until Merkel somehow finds a solution to the refugee question in Germany, this is going to continue.
Sorry, but I think we have to talk about the fact that when we talk about migration, we mean refugees and migrants at the same time still here in Germany, which is something that alienates a lot of people, because when we're talking about the right to asylum, this is something that no German citizen questions. You know, people who are in need of protection, they need to be protected here. But what's happening at the moment is that all of the problems that have arisen since we've had lots of people come here and claim or apply for asylum here, simply because there are no other ways into Germany, there have been problems, and we're not dealing with them in a separate way to the asylum issue itself. So, you know, they are beginning to talk about the need for an immigration law now, at last, you know, after decades of this actually being necessary. But what is happening is that there are people who are saying, OK, we can't even talk about the problems that we have with new arrivals here, because then everybody will accuse us of being anti-immigrant or xenophobic, whatever. But there are problems, and we just need to talk about ways of integrating those who have a right to stay here, and then of giving protection to people who need to be protected, but also of keeping people out who just have no way of living here.
Picking up on what you're saying and going back to Matthew. Matthew, you're from Politico. Your publication, your outlet says this week the dehumanisation of Europe is on the march. And my response to that was, you know, is the Merkel government actually contributing now to the dehumanisation of Europe?
Well, I didn't write that, and I actually disagree. We've got a lot of voices at Politico.
Which is good.
I don't think that she is contributing to it. I think, you know, this is a fairly pragmatic approach, and I think a lot of people have, you know, completely misread what she's done here. I don't think this is an about-face at all. As I said, she's the one who first suggested this solution with these transit zones, number one. And number two, if you look at what's happened since 2015 with Merkel's government and the way that it has you know, gradually tightened the asylum rules. There have been 2 asylum packages, as they call them. The rules have become much more stringent than they were in 2015. She hasn't been out there, you know, giving speeches about it, hasn't drawn a lot of attention to it. But it is today much more difficult as a refugee to get asylum in Germany than it was in 2015. So I think that this is another step that, you know, at least superficially appears to, you know, tighten the rules a bit. But in substance, it certainly is not a major departure from her previous policies. And I don't think that she's dehumanizing Europe at all. I think that, you know, there is a practicality issue. And I think that, you know, this is what sort of the mainstream German looks at this situation and thinks, well, you know, yes, we need to provide people asylum. We want to help, but there's sort of limits to what we can do. And this is sort of the tension in this debate, and has been from the beginning.
OK, thank you for those comments. We'll bring you in just a moment, Derek, because you were talking earlier about whether Germany is entering a phase of malaise or not. You were rather sceptical about that. A lot of people here in Germany, not just in the media, do believe that, you know, Germany is entering a malaise. Yeah. Let's have a look.
Back when the world was still intact, September 2013, when Germany's conservative parties won an almost absolute majority in the elections. CDU head Angela Merkel and her CSU counterpart Horst Seehofer were thrilled. Now disenchantment has set in, and not only in politics. The diesel scandal has devastated trust in Germany's manufacturing might. VW and Audi, but also Mercedes and other brands have been affected. New technologies were ignored by management, and instead emissions results were falsified. Deutsche Bank's image has suffered too. Bad loans, 3 years of losses. It was the only bank to fail the US stress test. Now it's counting on a leadership change. And what else? Oh yeah, the Germans can't even play soccer anymore. The current reigning champion crashed out of this year's World Cup in the group stage with the worst showing in their group. Is the team and its leadership too old, too satisfied, too self-aggrandizing? Germany in the summer of 2018. Does the country have a problem with its elites?
Go on then, Derek, let's hear it. Does the country have a problem? Is it mismanaged in soccer, business, politics? Is there a crisis with the German elite?
You win some, you lose some. I mean, you know, when you win the World Cup, the likelihood that you're going to win the World Cup or the Eurovision Song Contest the next time out is quite low. And yes, they probably could have done better, but my God, I mean, the pressure these people are under, they have to deliver every time. You know, I would say the car crisis was, that's collusion between the car industry and politics. They knew there was a problem. The politicians had put them under pressure to deliver clean diesel, which clearly isn't possible. And then they realised we have to work on each other. So I do think there's a problem there. But I've been here for almost 20 years and I've seen these sort of Cassandra journalists come along saying, you know, can Germany be saved? And it always works well in talk shows because the person who says, well, maybe it'll be okay, seems hopelessly naive. But what I have learned in 20 years in Germany is that Germans don't react at the first alarm bell and they don't react at the second alarm bell, but somewhere between the second and the third and final alarm bell, somebody goes, oh, Jesus, we have to do something. And something happens. I don't know if it's Merkel who's the person who will react. She's known for being able to jump off the diving board in her swimming lesson or act in politics just at the last moment. I'm starting to wonder if, you know, she's just like lots of people. She's had a long crisis-filled run and she's done some extraordinary things in Europe in terms of stability, but maybe she needs to move, whether she realises that herself. But this notion that Germany itself is, oh, you know, one swallow doesn't make a summer and 3 disasters doesn't make, you know, a catastrophe. You know, it's not the apocalypse. But, you know, it's always very fashionable to say Germany's in crisis and to add up all these things. And Der Spiegel did it this week and stirred it furiously. And lots of people swallow it and say, oh, yes, it must be true. You know, A plus B plus C equals Z. Yeah, whatever, you know.
Sorry. No, I agree that there is a risk that you overestimate the effects of football in Germany. But at the same time, I would say that lots of people here in Germany, and probably an increasing amount of people, feel disenfranchised. They feel like the politicians are no longer dealing with the real issues. You know, we've established that there are no big amounts of migrants coming into Germany at the moment.
This is then the AfD message again.
Exactly. Yeah. And they don't even have to deliver a solution because everybody else, all the other parties, are involved in their own meddlings. The Social Democrats, it would be a perfect opportunity for them to now say, OK, this is our stance on migration. This is what we want for the future. This is how we're going to solve your problems when it comes to care for the elderly. This is what we're going to do for families, etc. They're not delivering. So all the AfD have to do is say, we've got a problem with... And I disagree with you that migration is the only issue that they have, you know, because they don't have solutions. They just need to name the problems that people have.
Well, I would just say I think it's the issue that resonates most in Germany and in other countries. I mean, one of the things that's interested me about the German discussions is that the Germans are sort of discovering slowly what it means to have a successful populist party, a successful far-right party, and everybody's like really shocked, you know. If you look around the rest of Europe, this has been going on for quite some time. And there was an AfD politician last week when Germany lost who posted on Facebook or Twitter a picture of Mesut Özil, the German player who has Turkish roots, and there was a bit of a controversy involving some photographs that he had taken together with Erdogan before the World Cup. And this AfD politician essentially blamed Özil for this and said, you know, suggested he should be sent back to Turkey. And a lot of people were very upset about that. But this is the kind of thing that has been going on in France, it's been going on in Austria, the Netherlands, you know, for many years. So I think that, you know, if anything, the political landscape here is sort of catching up a bit to the rest of Europe. But, you know, coming back to what Derek said about, you know, is this, you know, the end of German stability? You know, I think it's definitely becoming less stable. And while it's not a catastrophe, I do think that there are signs in the economy in particular that this kind of second economic miracle that Germany's been going through over the past few years is coming to an end.
Let's give him we've got about a minute to go, Derek, and I want to hear what you have to say about all of that, because you, at the beginning of the show, said Germany has a stability obsession. You implied that that should become a thing of the past, that they should shake the obsession off, and you suggested that that would lead to fresh air, fresh thinking, fresh partners. That intrigued me. Tell me more.
I think Angela Merkel is a bit like, have you ever heard of lawnmower parenting? This is where a parent moves ahead of the child and clears all obstacles out of the way. Germans for the last 10 or 15 years haven't had to worry about politics. They haven't had to worry about what's going on in the world. Merkel was the mutti. I will take care of everything. You go back to sleep, I'll tell you when you need to wake up. Well, it's time to wake up. And I think people are starting to realise that it's time to really engage with politics again. And that can only be a good thing, because having a surrogate who agrees to do everything for you, that's like a very, very soft dictatorship. And I don't think that's good for any democracy, and not for Germany. OK, thank you very much for those comments. I really would like to have heard more, but it's been great stuff, fascinating. I hope we've given you at home some food for thought. Quadriga this week, German stability, a thing of the past. If you've enjoyed the show, come back next week. Bye-bye. Cheers.